the great hall of Stoneclaw Keep was never quiet. Not really. Even in the spaces between words, there was always something breathing, the low crackle of 50 iron torches, the scrape of goblets on ancient stone, the shifting weight of 5 packs pressed into one room, each one watching the others the way wolves always watch strangers. Still on the outside, ready on the inside. The summit of unification had not been called in a generation. 5 packs seated at one table: Grey Wolf, Direfang, Wolfrin, Wolfridge, Wildfang, senior wolves, border wolves, pack elders, and representatives. All gathered under the vaulted stone ceiling of Stoneclaw. Keep to negotiate the things that packs fight over when they are not at war: territory lines, trade routes, resource rights, and the careful, complicated question of who owes what to whom. Alpha King Sullivan Direfang stood at the head of the great stone table. He was not a wolf who needed to raise his voice to control a room. He never had been. Authority for Sullivan was a thing he wore the way other wolves wore armor. Close, constant, never removed. His jaw was set. His hand rested on the table with the stillness of a wolf who has learned that the less he moves, the more others watch him. And at that moment, Beta Callahan Wolfrin was watching him with the small, patient smile of a man who has been saving a particular sentence for the right moment and has just decided the moment has arrived. They were arguing boundary rights, the Frost Border territories, a stretch of land that 3 generations of Direfang kings had tried to claim through force and failed every time. Callahan lifted his goblet. "Your queen's management of the Frost Border territories has been remarkable, my king." He let the compliment settle before the other half arrived. Though one wonders, a she-wolf who runs alone is truly a queen at all, or simply a keeper you have forgotten to visit. The hall went still, the way rooms go still when everyone understands something is about to break. Sullivan set his goblet down on the stone, and then, measured, cold, spoken with the clipped precision of a king who had built his armor from distance and ruled from behind it for 3 long years, he said it. Said it to stop the needling, said it to perform the indifference he had long since made his shield. I never should have married her. 12 seats. From the head of the table, a woman in a grey travel cloak did not move immediately. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, while the words finished rolling down the stone table toward her, while 50 wolves processed what their king had just said, while the silence stretched out to its full, awful length. Then Valentina Wolfcrest reached inside the fold of her cloak. She removed a sealed parchment. Black wax, Elder Council seal, 3 wolves in a circle pressed into the center. She set it on the stone table with the quiet deliberateness of someone completing a task she had begun months ago. She rose, and across 12 empty seats and 50 witnesses, she lifted her eyes to her husband's face and said, without heat, without trembling, without anything in her voice but the calm certainty of a decision already made, "Good, now you don't have to anymore." To understand what she placed on that table, you have to understand what the 3 years before it cost her. Not in grief, not in anger, in patience, in letters. In 287 mornings she woke up and chose the work instead of the wound in a bond she honored completely, from a man who treated it like a formality. This is her story. She had arrived that morning, not to the summit, to the territory it occupied. The Wolfcrest border pass was a 3-hour ride from Stoneclaw Keep, and Valentina had made it in 2 because she had learned, in 3 years of governing the Frost Border, that arriving early was the only kind of control she had reliable access to. She had a treaty amendment, a witness signature from a neutral pack representative. A standard procedure. She had requested a seat at the perimeter table as Frost Border representative, and no one had looked twice. The name on the attendance scroll read V. Wolfcrest, Frost Border Territory Delegate. Not. Queen Valentina, mated to the Alpha King. She had not made that distinction deliberately. She had simply filled in the form the way it applied, and no one who processed the scroll had thought to ask further. She had not announced herself to Sullivan when she took her seat. This was not strategy, it was habit. She had become, in 3 years of marriage, extraordinarily skilled at existing in rooms where he did not look for her. It was not bitterness that had taught her this skill. It was simple, repeated experience. The hall had filled over the course of the morning. Representatives from all 5 packs arranged along the stone table, according to territory precedence. Valentina took the seat assigned to her, 12th from the head, on the left side, and she opened her treaty papers and she watched. She was good at watching. She had always been good at it, but 3 years of running a contested border territory without a partner had made her considerably better. She noticed Valentina Wolfcrest before the meeting formally opened. He moved through the room with the easy confidence of a wolf who understood politics as a long game and had no particular hurry about winning any single hand. He spoke to 3 different representatives in the time it took the hall to settle, and in each conversation he left something behind. A slight angle of doubt, a carefully placed question, the way a hunter marks a path. He was building toward something. She could see it in the way he kept returning his eyes to the head of the table. To Sullivan. By the time the afternoon session began, she had a reasonable idea of what was coming. She had heard versions of it before, from wolves at the border, who assumed that because their king did not speak of her, she was therefore not real. Or not relevant, or both. The argument was about the Frost Border. Of course it was about the Frost Border. Sullivan was explaining the Direfang Pack's historical claim to the eastern pasture routes, when Callahan set down his goblet and smiled his slow, prepared smile. Your queen's management of the Frost Border territories has been remarkable, my king. Inside her chest, Valentina felt something settle, the particular stillness that arrives when you have been waiting for something and it finally appears. She folded her hands in her lap. She watched Sullivan's face. Though one wonders, Callahan continued, a she-wolf who runs alone is truly your queen at all, or simply a keeper you have forgotten to visit. The hall went still. Sullivan's jaw tightened, only slightly, only for a moment. She could read him from 12 seats away, even now, even after everything, because she had spent the first year of their bond learning every line of that face before he had given her permission to do so. His hand stilled on the goblet. His eyes moved briefly, calculating. She could see him make the decision before he spoke. She could see him choose the armor. I never should have married her. The words were not cruel in the way that shouting is cruel. They were cruel in the quieter, more lasting way, the way that comes from not caring enough to be angry, from using someone's name to end a sentence and then moving on. She had heard contempt before. She had not expected indifference to feel worse. She sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she reached inside her cloak. The parchment had been there since morning. She had carried it in from the lodge that morning, alongside her treaty papers, in the inner fold of her travel cloak, where she kept things she needed but did not want seen. The Elder Council's black wax seal was intact. She had not opened it since the day it arrived. There had been no need. She set it on the stone table. The sound it made was almost nothing, the soft weight of finished business settling on old stone. She rose. She was aware, distantly, of the quality of attention in the room shifting the way water shifts in a bowl that has been tilted. Every wolf at the table had noticed the parchment, before they noticed her standing. Then they noticed her. Her voice, when she used it, did not require effort to carry the hall. Good. Now you don't have to anymore. She watched Sullivan turn. She watched the precise moment he found her face in the torchlight. 12 seats down, grey cloak. Her hands still folded in front of her because she had not yet unfolded them. And she watched the composure fracture, just at the corner, just once. A muscle in his jaw that went rigid before the mask rebuilt itself. His hand moved toward the table's edge and stopped. She pushed the parchment down the stone toward him with 2 fingers. The Elder Council reviewed the bond 3 months ago. Her voice was the same voice she used in territory meetings. Even, precise, not unkind. The formal severance is already recognized under pack law. I came to the summit to give you the courtesy of your signature in person. She reached for her treaty papers. She stacked them neatly. She straightened her cloak. I did not expect to need to give it to you here. She picked up her papers. But here we are. She walked, not quickly, not slowly, at the pace of a wolf who has somewhere to be and is neither rushing toward it nor running from anything behind her. 50 torches burned. 50 pairs of eyes followed her progress from the stone table to the great door of Stoneclaw Keep. She passed Grayson Greywolf, the eldest pack elder, who had set his goblet down so precisely that the click it made was the only sound in the hall. She passed the row of Wolfrin delegates, none of whom looked at Callahan. She passed the chair where, in another life, she might have sat beside her husband at the head of the table and called this a different kind of evening. She did not look at any of them. The great door of Stoneclaw Keep closed behind her with a sound no louder than a breath. Behind her, in the amber light of 50 torches, the hall remained silent. At the head of the table, Alpha King Sullivan, Dairish Fang stood with his eyes fixed on the parchment. The Elder Council's black wax seal, the empty chair 12 seats down, and the particular quiet left, behind by someone who was very good at not slamming doors. He would not eat for the rest of the evening. He would not sleep that night at all. She had come to the mating bond at 26. Not naive. Not without clear eyes or clear understanding of what a political union between rival packs required from both parties. The Wolfcrest bloodline held the frost border, a stretch of contested territory. 3 generations of Dairafang kings had tried to control through force and failed every time. Peace through bonding was the Elder Council's solution. Valentina had accepted it as duty. She had also, privately, believed something she had not said out loud. She had looked at Sullivan Direfang across the negotiating table during the final treaty discussions. His sharp, guarded attention, the way he listened without agreeing and disagreed without cruelty, and she had believed against every practical instinct she possessed that a wolf this closed might be worth opening. Given time, given patience, given someone willing to stand beside him long enough that he forgot to keep his guard up. She had believed this for 14 months. In the first year, she wrote to him every week. Not love letters. She was not that kind of woman, and Sullivan was not that kind of man. And she had understood from the beginning that approaching him with softness would have the same effect as approaching a guarded territory gate. It would simply confirm that the gate needed to be closed. So she wrote him letters about the frost border, about the patrol routes she was mapping, the gaps she had found in the eastern corridor, where response times were nearly double what they should have been, about the 3 young she-wolves she had begun training in pack law, because no previous administrator had thought to, about the old healing den at the Wolfcrest crossing that had been abandoned for 11 years, the one with the good stone walls and the spring water access, and what it might take to make it functional again. His replies in those early months were brief but real. Not warm, that was not the right word, but genuine. He wrote tactical observations. He wrote questions that proved he had actually read her words, not just skimmed them. Once, in the 4th month, he wrote a single paragraph about the Eastern Corridor response time that restructured her entire approach to the patrol rotation problem. And she read it 3 times in a row and sat with a particular, surprising pleasure of a mind meeting another mind that was actually worth meeting. She did not name that pleasure for what it was. It was too early. It was not safe yet. But she noticed it, the way you notice a door that has always been closed, standing open for the first time, careful, aware, not yet ready to walk through it, but glad to know it existed. In the 15th month, his replies stopped. She wrote 4 more letters before she let herself understand they had stopped for good. 4 weeks of writing into silence, each letter slightly more careful than the last, as if the precision of her language could somehow call him back, as if the right combination of words might cross whatever distance had opened between one letter and the next and find him on the other side. They did not. One evening in the early winter of the 2nd year, she sat in the great room of Wolfcrest Lodge with his last letter in her hands, dated 2 days after a successful border negotiation, when he had presumably been in good spirits. She read it again. She turned it over. She sat with it in the firelight until the fire burned low. Then she folded it away. She placed it in the hearthstone drawer with the others. And she got on with things. The things she got on with were considerable. The patrol restructure came first. She had been working on the Eastern Corridor problem for months, and with Sullivan's observation from the 4th month's letter still in her mind, she spent 2 weeks redesigning the rotation entirely. She worked from maps the previous administration had not updated in 11 years. She spoke with every border wolf who ran those routes. Donovan Wolfthorne, who had been on the East Ridge route for 6 years and knew every loose stone by instinct. Fitzgerald Wildfang, who was young enough to be fast and old enough to be careful. A dozen others, whose names and histories and families she learned because she asked. She put the new rotation into effect on a Thursday morning. Emergency response time dropped by half within the 1st month. She noted this in the accounts and moved on. The healing center was next. Seraphine Wolfgren had been working as a healer in the Wolfcrest border community for 4 years without a formal position, a proper building, or anything resembling appropriate compensation. She was the most gifted healer Valentina had encountered in the territory. Precise, calm, with the particular rare quality of knowing what she did not know and seeking help for it rather than pretending otherwise. The first time Valentina sat down with Seraphine over tea and asked her what she actually needed to do her work properly. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "No one has asked me that before." Valentina opened the Hearthstone ledger to a blank page. "I'm asking now." What followed was a 3-month project. The old stone building at the Wolfcrest crossing was cleaned, repaired, stocked, and formally registered as the first Interpack healing facility in the Frost border. Seraphine received a salary, a title, and 2 assistants. The ledger entry read simply, "Pack welfare recurring." Valentina did not note it in any correspondence. There had been no correspondence to note it in. The trade agreement with the Frostwolf Pack came in the 2nd year's 8th month. Alpha Remington Frostwolf of the neighboring neutral territory controlled the mountain passage routes that the Direfang Pack had been trying to access for 11 years. 3 separate Direfang emissaries had attempted the negotiation and returned empty-handed each time. Valentina had read the accounts of all 3 failed attempts and identified the problem in the first afternoon. Every emissary had gone to Remington knowing what the Direfang Pack wanted, but none of them had gone knowing what Remington actually needed. She requested a meeting herself. No emissary, just Valentina, a treaty framework she had drafted over 2 weeks, and the genuine curiosity to listen rather than propose. Remington Frostwolf was a quiet wolf with careful eyes and a very good memory. He received her in his lodge's east room and said almost nothing for the first hour while she talked. When she paused and asked what it was that previous negotiations had consistently missed, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. The agreement they signed 3 hours later included a clause that every previous Direfang emissary had never offered because they had never thought to ask. It held. It was still holding 14 months later when Valentina placed the Hearthstone ledger on the table at the summit and opened it to the trade accounts page. And then there was Genevieve. Sullivan's younger sister had been quietly excluded from 3 consecutive Alpha Council sessions by a faction within his own pack who found her voice inconvenient. Valentina had learned of it through Seraphine, whose younger brother, Augustus Wolfgren, worked at the lodge, and had heard it in passing from one of the council's attending wolves. She had sat with that information for 2 days before she decided what to do about it. She did not write to Sullivan. There were no longer letters to write him in. She sent a private note to Genevieve Direfang instead, inviting her to observe the Wolfcrest territorial sessions once a month as an outside observer with no formal title and no announcement. Genevieve arrived the following month, looking like someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of invitation without knowing how to ask for it. She was smart. She absorbed pack law the way dry ground absorbs rain, quickly, completely, leaving no trace on the surface, but transformed underneath. 8 months later, Genevieve walked back into the Alpha Council session that had last excluded her. She took her seat. She opened her mouth, and not one wolf in that room had the legal standing to dismiss what she said. Because she had learned at the Wolfcrest territorial sessions exactly how to make herself impossible to dismiss. Valentina had never told Sullivan. There had been no letters in which to tell him. But she had written it down, all of it, every decision, every negotiation, every small act of stewardship in letters addressed to her husband that she had stopped sending but never stopped writing. It had started as habit, the form of the correspondence outlasting the correspondence itself. The letters were detailed, precise, and honest, which meant they were also, in places, the only record of things that had no other witness. She wrote about the wolves by name. She wrote about Seraphine and what the healer said the morning she finally received a proper salary. She wrote about the morning she stood in the empty courtyard of the future healing center and tried to imagine what it would look like when it was full. She wrote about the pup who asked if the Alpha King would be coming to the winter gathering, and the lie she had told because she could not bear to tell the truth to a child. She wrote 287 letters total. She kept every one of them in copies in a bound ledger beneath the hearthstone at Wolfcrest Lodge. She did not keep them as evidence, not at first. She kept them because she needed somewhere to be witnessed, even if only by herself. She filed the severance petition with the Elder Council 3 months before the summit. The grounds were simple and well documented. Abandonment of the reciprocal duties of the mate bond, evidenced across 2.5 years of unreciprocated correspondence. She included copies of the relevant letters. Not all 287, but enough. The Elder Council convened a review panel. 3 senior elders read the record over a period of 4 weeks. They agreed unanimously. The formal severance document arrived by courier. Valentina held it for a moment, turned it over once, and placed it in the inner fold of her travel cloak. She had carried it there for 3 months, waiting for the right occasion to present it to Sullivan in person. She had intended originally to request a private meeting. She had assumed that much, at least, was owed to them both. She had not assumed it would happen in a hall full of 50 wolves, in the light of 50 torches, with his voice still echoing off the stone walls. But here they were. Sullivan Dyrafang arrived at Wolfcrest Lodge on a Tuesday morning. 4 days after the summit, without sending word. He had intended to send word. He had composed 3 different messages in his mind during the 2-day ride, and discarded all of them because they all began the same way, with something he wanted to say before she had agreed to hear it, which he recognized dimly as the wrong kind of beginning. The gatekeeper who received him was a young male named Augustus Wolfcrest, who had Seraphine's careful eyes and a very calm manner for someone who had just opened a gate to find his Alpha King on the other side of it. "My lord," a brief pause. "We were not expecting you. I didn't send word." Sullivan looked past him at the lodge. Stone walls, clean windows, the morning smoke rising straight from the eastern chimney. "Is she here?" "My lady is in the eastern fields this morning. The drainage survey." Augustus held the gate open with the quiet courtesy of someone who has not been told what to do in this situation, but has decided on dignity as the appropriate approach. "If it pleases you, I can show you to the sitting room." The sitting room was not what he expected. He stood in it for a full minute before he could name what was wrong with his expectation. He had braced, without quite admitting it, for signs of neglect. A lodge left too long under its own management, accounts in disorder, correspondence stacked unopened, the general evidence of a household running on ceremony rather than actual attention. He had told himself he had not braced for this. He had simply assumed it, the way you assume things about places you have not visited in 2 years. The room was immaculate, not in a performed, prepared for company way, in the particular way of rooms that are regularly and genuinely used. A fire that had been laid that morning, windows unfogged, clear on both sides. A territorial survey spread open on the writing desk, with annotations in a handwriting he didn't recognize because he had never seen her working script. An ink jar with fresh ink, still wet at the rim. A ledger open to a page dense with numbers and dates. He did not pick up the ledger. He stood in front of the window instead and looked out at the frost border fields. They looked different than he remembered. Better. He could not immediately name the specific change. It was something in the way the land lay, something even and deliberate about the field drainage that spoke of recent management. He stood there looking for long enough that he realized he was avoiding turning back to the room. He turned back to the room. Valentina came in from the side entrance, not the formal doors but the working passage from the eastern wing. She was in riding clothes, mud on her boots well past the ankle, and she carried a second ledger under her left arm and a folded survey amendment in her right hand. She had apparently ridden back from the fields when Augustus sent word, because there were still flecks of field mud on her left cheek that she either had not noticed or had decided not to care about. She crossed directly to the writing desk. She set down the ledger and the amendment. She opened the ledger to the relevant page. Then she turned and looked at him with the calm attention of a wolf who has a territory to run and is waiting to understand how this particular interruption relates to that work. "Alpha King," her voice was even. "How can I help you?" The formality of the title landed between them like a door swinging shut. She had called him Sullivan in the early letters. He remembered because he had read those letters 3 times in succession when they first arrived, and had then put them away in a drawer and not answered them, and had not examined his reasons for this at the time. He was examining them now. "I came to..." He stopped. The prepared version of this sentence did not work in the actual room in front of the actual woman with the actual mud on her boots. "I wanted to speak with you, yes." She waited. Not unkindly, simply waiting. "About the territory accounts, I thought. I could review them, take some of the administrative weight." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned the ledger to face him and crossed her arms over it, not blocking the page, presenting it. Page 8 covers the patrol restructure. She did not move toward him. I redesigned the rotation in the second year. Emergency response time dropped by half within the first month. The current schedule is on the facing page. He came to the desk. He looked at the page. The figures were meticulous. Dates, times, names of the wolves on each route. Response records going back 18 months. I wasn't aware. Page 12 covers the trade settlement with Alpha Remington Frostwolf. The agreement has held for 14 months. He turned to page 12. Read the terms. Recognized, with something that felt like standing in cold water, that the clause on line 7 was the clause that 3 Direfang emissaries had never managed to negotiate. She had done it herself, without emissary, without announcement, without a single letter of report to the man whose territory it served. He looked up from the ledger. She was watching him read with the neutral patience of a woman presenting a business account. You did all of this. The Frost border is my responsibility. She said it without emphasis. It has been my responsibility for 3 years. I managed it as such. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Genevieve. Something shifted in Valentina's expression, just slightly. Not guilt. Something more careful than guilt. I learned from Seraphine that she had been excluded from the council sessions. She spoke carefully. I invited her to observe the Wolfcrest territorial sessions on a monthly basis for 8 months. The information arrived the way the ledger pages had, one fact at a time, each one requiring a moment to land before the next one could be received. She walked back into the council session in the 9th month. Valentina continued, with sufficient knowledge of pack law to make herself impossible to dismiss. I did not tell her the source of the invitation. She believes it was a protocol courtesy. Sullivan had come to his feet without deciding to stand. He was standing at the side of the desk, one hand on the chair back, looking at the woman across the writing surface, with an expression he was not in control of. You should have told me. The words came out before he examined them. You should have. I wrote you 287 letters. She said it the same way she had said the drainage figures, the same way she had said the trade settlement clause, precisely, without heat. Factual. She reached beneath the open ledger and placed a bound stack of papers on the desk between them. The cord was plain. The papers were aged at the edges. There were many of them. The Elder Council required documentation of the bond abandonment claim, she said. The letters are arranged by date. They reviewed a selection of them during the severance proceedings. He looked at the stack. He did not touch it. The word abandonment sat somewhere in the center of his chest, like a stone finding the floor of a river. I would suggest, she said, picking up the Eastern Survey amendment, that we complete the territory walk before the afternoon weather comes in. The western ridge loses light early this time of year. She picked up the larger ledger. She led the way to the door. He followed, because there was nothing else to say yet, and because the walk was still in front of them, and the work, apparently, was not the kind that waited. The frost border under morning light looked like good work. That was the only honest way to describe it. He had governed territories. He knew what managed land looked like versus neglected land, and this, all of this, was managed. The drainage channels she pointed out along the lower fields, the border markers she had reset after the 3rd year's survey, revealed the previous ones had drifted. The healing center at the crossing, which was not a healing center so much as a small but precisely organized stone building with a lit window and 2 figures moving inside it. She walked him through all of it in the same tone. Detailed, unhurried, not proud, simply accurate. They were on the upper ridge when the storm came. The frost border's western weather was always fast. It came in from the mountains without warning, and arrived completely. One moment clear, the next a wall of wind and cold rain moving across the fields at speed. Sullivan had been on the ridge for perhaps 30 seconds before the first gust hit. Valentina was standing at the edge of the ridge path, pointing out the line of the new eastern markers, when the old pine at the perimeter took the wind's full force. The cracking sound was sharp and immediate. A heavy branch broke free from the upper fork and swung down across the ridge path on a direct line with where she was standing. Sullivan moved before he was aware of deciding to move. He stepped between her and the branch, not grabbing her, not throwing her clear, simply moving into the gap, arms out at his sides, body turned to receive whatever was coming. The branch caught the edge of his shoulder as it swung through, not heavily, but it would bruise. The branch crashed into the undergrowth below the path and was still. The rain came in sideways, cold and steady, the way frost border rain always was. He turned. She was 2 steps behind him, entirely unhurt, watching him with an expression he could not read in the rain and the grey light. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then she said, in the same even voice, "Thank you," and she walked back down the ridge path toward the lodge, and he followed, and neither of them mentioned it again. But his shoulder would be bruised for 4 days, and he would not stop thinking about the fact that his body had moved before his mind gave it permission. That evening, Valentina went to bed early. She left the study door open. She did not make any point of this. She simply did not pull it closed when she passed. The oil lamp on the writing desk was still burning, turned low, but lit. The hearthstone drawer was not locked. She had not in 3 years ever locked it. But Sullivan had no way of knowing that, because Sullivan had never been in this room at night before. She was aware, as she climbed the stairs to the upper floor, that she was not making a decision so much as declining to prevent one. There was a difference. It mattered to her that there was a difference. Sullivan found the study at 9:30. He had been restless since dinner, moving through the lodge in the particular way of someone who has too many thoughts for the rooms available. He had eaten with Donovan Wolfthorne, the estate manager, who was a careful, decent wolf who answered questions directly and volunteered nothing, which Sullivan had found either admirable or frustrating depending on the question. Twice he had started toward the staircase and redirected himself. The third time, he passed the study doorway and saw the lamp. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he crossed to the writing desk and opened the hearthstone drawer. The letters were in bundles, tied with plain cord, organized by date exactly as she had said. He took the first bundle and sat in the chair by the desk. He untied the cord. He read the first letter. It was dated 6 weeks after their mating ceremony. It was an assessment of the frost border patrol routes, preliminary, detailed, full of specific observations about terrain and response gaps, and the individual wolves she had spoken to in her first week. At the end, she had written 4 questions. They were direct, practical questions. They were the kind of questions that expected answers. He read the second letter, then the third. By the 5th letter, he was no longer sitting upright in the chair. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, the page held in both hands. By the 10th letter, he had moved from the chair to the floor. He had not decided to do this. He had simply moved, the way you move when a chair becomes inadequate for whatever is happening to you. And the floor is at least honest about having no pretensions. He sat against the desk, with his back against the wood, and the bundles arranged around him, and he read. He had braced for accusation. He had constructed, on the ride to Wolfcrest, a version of these letters in his imagination, aggrieved, pointed, cataloguing his failures in the particular way that made guilt feel more like an attack than a reckoning. He had prepared responses. He had organized his regret into defensible positions the way he organized all uncomfortable things, with enough structure that he could manage them. The letters did not give him anything to defend against. They were a record of a life, his mate's life, in the territory she had governed for 3 years, written to him every week for the first year, and then continued alone for 2 years more because he understood this slowly, and then all at once, the way cold water arrives because she had needed somewhere to be witnessed, even if only by herself. She wrote about Donovan Wolfthorne, who had managed the Wolfcrest accounts for 6 years before her arrival, and had been, she wrote, cautious at first, and then simply hard-working, which is the better quality of the two. She wrote about Fitzgerald Wildfang and the East Ridge route, and the way the trail changed after the first frost made the stones unpredictable. She wrote about Seraphine Wolfgren, the morning they sat down over tea, and she asked what the healer actually needed, and the long pause before Seraphine said, "No one has asked me that before." He read that paragraph 3 times. He read about the trade negotiation with Remington Frostwolf. 3 drafts of the proposal, the conversation that finally worked, the clause that had eluded 3 emissaries because they had never thought to simply listen. He read about the healing center dedication, the wolves who came from 3 territories to the opening, the pup who asked Seraphine if the medicines could fix anything, the way the afternoon light came through the east-facing windows and made the whole room look like something that had always been there. He read about Genevieve. A single paragraph, as Valentina had described it in the study. It contained no judgment of him for not knowing. It contained no pride. It was simply a description of a problem she had seen and a solution she had provided, written in the same tone she used for drainage figures. He put the page down for a moment. He looked at the low fire. He was aware that he had a sister. He had been aware of Genevieve's existence in the specific way that busy wolves are aware of peripheral things, as something present and understood and not requiring immediate attention. He had not asked, in 3 years, whether Genevieve was all right. He had not asked because he had assumed she was. He picked the page up again. He kept reading. In the 9th month of the 2nd year, she wrote about a morning she woke before dawn to the sound of a wolf howling alone from the North Ridge, far enough away to be from another pack. She wrote that she had lain still for a long time listening and thought about loneliness and what it costs a wolf to choose it, and whether choosing it is always the same as wanting it, or whether sometimes choosing it is simply the only thing you know how to do. She did not name him in that paragraph. She did not need to. He did not light a second candle when the first burned down. He continued reading by firelight alone, because stopping to find a candle would have been an interruption he was not willing to make. The last letter was dated 8 months ago. It was a single page, written in a hand slightly less controlled than the others, as though composed quickly or in poor light, or both. She wrote about a pup from the border village who had come to the lodge to ask whether the Alpha King would be attending the Frost Border winter gathering. She wrote that she had told the pup yes. She wrote that she had then sat with that lie for the rest of the afternoon, unable to decide whether it had been kinder to the pup or to herself. She concluded, at the end of the afternoon, that it had been neither, and that she would not make it again. The letter ended there. No closing sentiment, the date, her signature, and then the page of the hearthstone drawer, and the stillness of a drawer that had held those pages for 8 months without being opened. Sullivan sat on the floor of his wife's study in the grey pre-dawn light, with the last letter in his hands, and the fire burned to coals and the clock showing 4 in the morning. He had not wept. He was not the kind of wolf who wept easily, and this was not a moment that wanted weeping. It was too large for that, too specific. It was the kind of reckoning that does not arrive in tears, but in the slow, total understanding of a thing you cannot unknow. He had treated the mate bond as a formality, not cruelly. He would have said, 3 months ago, that he had simply been realistic about what a political union could offer. That he had not made promises he could not keep. That silence was honest in its own way. He had been wrong about all of it, and the evidence of his wrongness was arranged around him in 287 letters on a study floor, specific and patient, and entirely without malice. The study door opened at first light. He did not look up immediately. He heard the handle turn, the soft hinge, the particular quality of someone stopping in a doorway. Then the silence of understanding, the shape of a pause that had something specific in it. He looked up. Valentina stood in the doorway, in her morning clothes, hair not yet arranged, a cup of tea in her hands that she had clearly carried from the kitchen and was now holding without drinking. She was looking at the room, at the bundles arranged on the floor, at the burned-down candle, at him sitting against the desk with the last letter in his hands. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she stepped back. The door closed as quietly as it had opened. She was gone. He sat with that for a long time, the room lightening around him, the fire fully cold now. Outside, the rain that had come with the storm had stopped at some point in the night, and the frost-border morning was very still. He got up. He gathered every bundle and reteed every cord. He replaced them in the hearthstone drawer in the exact order he had found them, because they were hers, and because careful was the very least of what they deserved. He closed the drawer. He did not know what to do with what he now carried. There was no action that was equal to it. There was no correct response to a life you were invited into and did not enter. But he was beginning to understand that the absence of a correct response did not mean the absence of an obligation to try. 3 days after he read the letters, Sullivan stopped making offers. Not because Valentina had rejected them. She had declined each one with the same precise, unhurried courtesy she applied to everything, and each time she had been correct. The thing he was proposing was already done. The accounts were managed. The arrangements were in place. The wolves had names and schedules, and Seraphine had a salary, and the trade agreement had held for 14 months. And there was nothing in this territory that needed him to offer it what it already had. "You're trying to do the right thing," she had said when he offered to arrange a permanent income guarantee. "But the right thing in each case you've described is something I have already done for myself. I don't need you to do it for me." He had no answer to that, so he stopped trying to answer it, and he started doing something else instead. On Thursday morning, he was at the stable at 6 when the farrier arrived. Thomas Birch had been shoeing the Wolfcrest horses for 11 years. He was a compact, practical wolf with flour on his jacket, who looked at Sullivan with the specific assessment of a tradesman encountering a lord who has shown up at the working hour without an obvious reason. Sullivan took up a position at the mare's head and held it. The mare's name was Ember. She was difficult on her left foreleg. Had been for years, Thomas explained, not quite asking why Sullivan was there, but filling the space of the question with information. It required patience and a specific tone of voice, the kind that communicated that the farrier was not planning to do anything unexpected. Sullivan held the mare's head for 40 minutes without speaking unnecessarily. He passed tools when Thomas indicated them. He learned the mare's name because he asked, and Thomas's history because Thomas offered it in the comfortable quiet of shared work. And when Ember finally settled, her whole body exhaling, her head dropping just slightly into his hands, he felt something in himself settle a corresponding amount. He did not mention this to Valentina. She learned of it afterward from Augustus, who mentioned it in passing. At the accounts meeting on Friday morning, Sullivan took the chair that was not at the head of the territory table. He sat beside Donovan Wolfthorne instead of across from him, and he listened to the estate manager go through the quarterly figures without offering corrections. He asked 2 questions. Both questions proved he had been reading the patrol reports left on the study writing desk. Donovan Wolfthorne noted this, with a single brief pause in his delivery, and then continued. And something in the quality of the pause told Sullivan it had been noticed in a way that mattered. On Saturday, he found Penelope Wolfridge in the kitchen. Penelope had been housekeeper at Wolfcrest Lodge for 19 years. She was a small wolf with an organized manner and the particular authority of someone who knows every room in a building, the way other wolves know their own hands. She received Sullivan's request to know the names and histories of the border wolves and their families, with an expression that gave nothing away while she decided what to do with it. Then she poured him a cup of tea, and she sat down across from him at the kitchen table. And she talked for an hour, not because she had been told to, not because he was her alpha king, because she was a wolf who did not give her warmth carelessly, and something in the asking had told her the question was genuine. By the end of the hour, Sullivan had filled 3 pages of his notebook with names, family connections, histories, and the particular details that make a person real rather than a record. The wolves, who ran the eastern route, had a father recovering from a winter injury. The youngest of the healing center assistants had recently completed her first certification and was very proud of it, and somewhat embarrassed by her pride. Fitzgerald Wildfang had a sister who wanted to train as a border scout, but had not yet asked anyone for the opportunity. He noted all of it. He would learn all of it properly, in time. Because he had understood something sitting on the study floor at 4 in the morning. The wolves in those letters were real, because Valentina had taken the time to make them real to herself. He had 287 letters documenting what that looked like. He could begin to understand what it required. On Sunday afternoon, he passed the library. The door was open. Valentina was on the upper rung of the reading ladder, reaching for a land survey from the elder years. The book was on the top shelf, 2 arm lengths beyond her comfortable reach. She was stretching. He came in without being invited. He crossed the room to the base of the ladder. He reached up, not to take the book for her, not to guide her down, but to set one hand on the ladder rail, steadying it. The way you steady something that is already managing, but should not have to manage alone. She reached the book. She tucked it under her arm. She looked down at him for one brief moment from the upper rung, an angle she had not had access to before, in the few days of his presence at the lodge. Then she came down. 3 rungs, 4, her boots finding each rung with the practiced ease of someone who climbs this ladder regularly. For those 3 rungs, his hand remained on the rail, close enough that she was aware of it the way you are aware of something you thought you had put behind you and find, unexpectedly, still present. She stepped off the ladder. She set the survey on the reading table. She did not say anything about the ladder, neither did he. That afternoon, she found herself in the kitchen garden with Penelope, standing among the last of the autumn roses, deep red, going brown at the edges, clinging on against the coming cold. She had not planned to say anything in particular. She had gone to the kitchen garden because there was a drainage question on the south plot that she wanted to check before the end of the day. What came out instead was, "I don't know whether I'm willing to choose a marriage, any marriage." I thought I did know. I believed for a time that I knew quite clearly, and now I find I don't. Penelope looked at the roses for a moment before she answered. "You don't have to know today, my lady." Valentina looked at the roses too. No, she agreed. I suppose not. She went back to the drainage question, but the thing she had said remained in the air of the garden. Small, admitted, real. She had not said it to Sullivan. She was not ready to say it to Sullivan. But she had said it to someone, and it was no longer only in her own chest, and that, she found, made a difference. On Monday, Sullivan visited the border school. He had not told her he was going. He had simply gone, alone, on foot, in the early morning before the day's meetings. The school was in the village, built on Wolfcrest land, funded from territory income, staffed by Evangeline Wolfhart, who had been teaching the border children without a proper building for 3 years before Valentina had commissioned one. He sat in the back of the classroom for an hour. He did not introduce himself, or rather, he introduced himself as a visiting wolf from the capital, which was true enough. He watched Evangeline manage a room of 12 young wolves with the calm, organized energy of someone who has found the work they were made for. He asked her, afterward, about the curriculum. She told him, and he listened, and when he asked what she needed and she named reading primers. The current set was worn through, and a second batch had not yet been budgeted. He left a donation before he went. Valentina learned of this from the village healer, who had seen him walking back through the village in the late morning. She was standing in the school doorway when the healer told her. She looked at the building for a while afterward. She was thinking about a wolf who had read 287 letters on a study floor and had then, without announcement or applause, gone to see the school those letters had mentioned. Not to report back, not to offer anything, just to see it for himself. She was not yet ready to name what was happening inside her chest, but she could feel it. The careful thing that had once been there and then been put away, unfolding cautiously toward the light. The Elder Council's pack law arbiter arrived on a Wednesday morning. Grayson Stoneclaw was a wolf of late middle age, with the precise, unhurried manner of someone who has presided over enough difficult proceedings to have stopped finding difficulty alarming. He carried the final severance documents in a sealed case. He received Sullivan in the Alpha study, which Valentina had offered to Sullivan on his first day at the lodge, with the same even courtesy she had offered everything else. I've never used it for myself. It's yours if you need it. The proceedings were brief. The pack law was clear. The severance had already been recognized by the Elder Council 3 months prior. This was the final execution. Witness signatures, seal affixment, formal registration. The witnesses were Grayson Stoneclaw, Donovan Wolfthorne, and Penelope Wolfridge. Penelope's expression throughout was entirely unreadable, which Sullivan was beginning to understand was its own kind of statement. Valentina was not present. Sullivan had not asked her to be. He had made this decision the previous evening, sitting alone in the study after supper, and had not examined it at length, because examination was not required. The decision was simple. These proceedings were his to attend. They were not hers to witness. She had already done the attending. 3 months ago, in the Elder Council's review chamber, alone, with 287 letters in a bound ledger as her testimony. She did not need to sit in a room and watch her own severance made official. She deserved better than that. The arbiter left at noon. Donovan Wolfthorne returned to the estate accounts. Penelope Wolfridge went back to the kitchen, pausing in the doorway long enough to give Sullivan a single look that communicated several things simultaneously, and none of them in a language he could fully decode. He sat alone in the study with the executed documents in front of him on the desk. The bond was dissolved. The mate bond he had entered at 24. The union that had been for him a political resolution and a quiet, unexamined convenience was formally, legally, permanently done. The elders' seals were affixed. The witnesses' names were recorded. 3 years of history closed with the press of a mark and the scratch of a pen. He sat with that for a while. Then he picked up the documents, folded them into their envelope, and stood. He sent word to the lodge that he would be at the Wolfcrest border crossing if she wished to come. He did not say why. He did not say, "Come," he said, "if you wish." That distinction, too, mattered to him. The crossing was where they had first made promises to each other. Not Stoneclaw Keep, not the capital. Valentina had insisted on the Wolfcrest border post, the stone markers where the Frost border territories officially began, because the Frost border was hers, and she had wanted at least that much of their beginning to be on ground she knew. He had agreed at the time without understanding why it mattered to her. He understood now. He stood in the gap between the border posts and waited. The afternoon was clear, cold, but still. The Frost border grass ran away on both sides, in the particular gold of late autumn. In the distance, the lodge was visible. Stone walls, chimney smoke, the east-facing windows catching the afternoon light. He had stood in rooms behind those windows for 8 days. He was only now beginning to understand what they faced. He heard her before he saw her, the quiet rhythm of footsteps through the dry autumn grass. She came alone, on foot, through the field. She was wearing her grey travel cloak, the same one from the summit. Her hands were at her sides. She walked at the pace she always walked, unhurried, purposeful, the pace of a wolf who has a destination and is not doubting it. She stopped in front of him. He held out the envelope. She took it. She unsealed it. She read through the pages carefully, from the first paragraph to the last. He watched her read, and he watched the particular stillness of her face as she moved through the document. Not grief, not relief, something quieter than either. The look of a wolf arriving at the end of a very long road and recognizing the end for what it is. She folded the papers, she held them at her side, she looked at him. He was quiet for a moment, not gathering himself. He had gathered himself already, had done it on the ride to the crossing, had understood before he arrived that what he was about to say would be answered with a no. He had no right to argue with, and that he needed to be ready to receive that answer with honesty. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to be clear before I ask it that the answer may be no. A no would be a fair answer. I would not argue with it or try to reason you out of it." Valentina waited, her eyes on his face, her expression giving nothing away, which was not coldness. He understood now that it was simply what she looked like when she was listening fully. "I would like to court you," he said it plainly, "from the beginning. Not as your mate. I am not your mate anymore. The bond I had through that history is gone, and I don't intend to use it as a claim, as a wolf who would like the chance, over whatever time you require, to become someone you might one day choose to have in your life." The frost border grass moved in the light wind. Somewhere along the west ridge a bird called once and was silent. "I understand what I did," he continued. "Not the version I told myself for 3 years. The version where keeping my distance was a kind of honesty, where silence was safer than a promise I could not keep. I understand now what it actually was, what it cost you. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking only for the chance to be different, if you will allow it." The silence that followed was a living thing. He held it without filling it, which was perhaps the single most difficult thing he had done in the 8 days since the summit, including reading 287 letters on a study floor in the dark. Valentina looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the grass. The afternoon light shifted. Then she spoke. "The Frost border territory remains in my name as a settled territory." Her voice was even, permanently, regardless of what follows, between us. That is not a condition I am setting on a courtship. It is simply a fact that will not change. "Yes," he said it without hesitation. "Any courtship proceeds on my schedule, by my invitation. You do not arrive at the lodge without word. You do not decide what I need and provide it without asking me first. You ask. Yes. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she closed the distance. She did it herself. That was the important thing. And he understood as it happened that it would always matter that she had done it herself. She stepped forward and kissed him once, at the border crossing, where they had first made promises neither of them had known how to keep. And the kiss was brief and certain, the way decisions are when they have been thought through carefully. When she stepped back, her expression was not soft, it was resolved. The look of a wolf who has made a choice she stands behind. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. Send word first. She turned and walked back through the autumn grass with the dissolution papers folded under her arm. She did not look back. He stood at the border crossing for a while after she was gone. In the cold, clear afternoon air, with the frost border territory spread out in front of him, the good, drained fields, the healing center visible at the crossing, the smoke from the lodge chimneys rising straight in the still air. A territory that had been managed without him for 3 years. A woman who had built something real, out of patience, and 287 letters no one had read, on ground she had chosen for herself. He was going to have to earn this, not with gestures or proposals or the administrative weight he could offer. Those had been the wrong kind of currency from the beginning. He would have to earn it with the same thing she had used to build the territory. Specific attention, consistent presence, and the willingness to learn the names of things. He looked at the lodge for a long time. Then he walked toward the village, and the inn at the edge of the Wolfcrest border, because the lodge was her home, and he was not yet, in any sense that he had earned, someone who should treat it as his. The inn at the edge of the Wolfcrest border was small and clean, with a writing desk in each room and a view from the eastern window of the frost border fields under the winter stars. Sullivan had taken the room without discussion. The innkeeper, a grey-muzzled wolf named Benedict Wolfridge, who was related to Penelope through her husband's family, and who had the same unreadable quality in his expression, had handed over the key with the brisk courtesy of someone who has seen enough of life to take most of it in stride. The room was plain, good fire, fresh bedding, a lamp that worked, the writing desk under the east window. Sullivan stood at the window for a while after he arrived, looking at the frost border in the dark, before he sat down. The desk held paper, a pen, and an ink jar. He sat in front of them for a long time before he picked up the pen. In 3 years of their bond, he had written to her perhaps 20 times in the first year, and not at all in the final 2. He had told himself at the time that he had nothing useful to say, that practical correspondence served the bond's purposes, and anything beyond that would be a kind of dishonesty. An implication of warmth he wasn't certain he possessed. He had told himself that silence, at least, did not make promises it could not keep. He sat with that now, the truth of it, and the failure of it. Silence had not been honest. It had simply been easier than presence, and he had chosen easy the way wolves choose things they have not examined, without understanding it was a choice at all. He understood now. He picked up the pen. He wrote about the frost border fields, about walking through them again that afternoon, after leaving the border crossing, in the particular low light of a late autumn afternoon that turns everything the color of old gold, about what properly drained land looks like. The way it lies even and dark, the way it holds the light differently than untreated ground, the evidence of work done carefully over time that does not announce itself but simply is. He wrote about Thomas Birch, the farrier, about the mare Ember and her difficult left foreleg. About 40 minutes in the stable on a Thursday morning, the mare's head in his hands, The specific patience required to communicate to a frightened animal that nothing unexpected was about to happen. He wrote about the moment she settled, the way her whole body exhaled and her weight shifted into his hands, with the quiet trust of a creature that has decided, on no greater evidence than a consistent tone and a patient presence, that it is safe. He crossed out the next line he wrote. He looked at it for a moment, then left the crossing out and continued, because removing it felt like the wrong kind of precision. He wrote about Evangeline Wolfhart and the school, about sitting in the back of the classroom on a Monday morning among 12 young wolves who were practicing their letters with the careful seriousness of the very young doing something that matters, about watching Evangeline move through the rows with the unhurried confidence of someone who knows her work completely. He wrote that he had arranged for a second set of reading primers to arrive before winter. He wrote that when he sat there that morning and thought about what it had taken to build that school, to imagine a building full of children learning things they would carry their whole lives, and then make that building real, without being asked, without announcement, without a single letter reporting it to the wolf whose territory it served. He had not had the right word for what he felt. He was still looking for that word. He wrote this too. He wrote about Genevieve. He had sent a message to his sister from Stoneclaw Keep before riding to Wolfcrest. A short message, carefully written, telling her that she was owed an apology and a seat at the council table, and that he intended to make sure she had both. He had not told her about Valentina's 8 months of territorial sessions. He had not taken that from her. It was a gift that belonged to Genevieve to receive or not receive, in whatever form felt right, and he was not the one to deliver it. But he wrote to Valentina that he had told Genevieve herself, that he believed Valentina would have told her eventually, in her own way and in her own time, and that he was glad he had arrived at the understanding before she needed to. He looked at that paragraph for a moment. He left it. He wrote about the portrait of his mother that hung in the Wolfcrest Great Hall. He had found it on his first morning at the lodge, early, before anyone else was about, walking the ground floor, in the particular restlessness of someone who doesn't know yet where they are allowed to stand. The portrait had been cleaned, reframed, hung in a position of honor on the great hall's eastern wall, where the morning light from the tall windows fell across it in a way that made the paint look almost alive. He had stood in front of it for a long time. He had not been able to speak, which was not unusual for him, but for once the silence had not been armor. His mother had died when he was 15. She had been a wolf who understood, better than most, what it meant to carry a territory. Not to own it, but to be responsible to it. She had told him once that a wolf who knows the names of the people in their care is worth twice one who knows only the accounts. He wrote that he thought his mother would have liked Valentina. He wrote that this was a thing he had not permitted himself to think before. He wrote that now that he had permitted it, he found he believed it completely. He sealed the letter. He had written 5 pages. He had crossed out 2 lines. He had used the whole of the ink jar's remaining contents, and had needed to refill it from the small bottle the innkeeper had left in the room. He had been writing for 3 hours, and the fire had burned down twice and been rebuilt twice by the inn's overnight staff, who knocked quietly and came in and tended the hearth without making any particular issue of the fact that their alpha king was sitting at a writing desk in an inn at the Wolfcrest border at midnight, covering pages with ink. He gave the sealed letter to Benedict Wolfridge's son, a young wolf named Callum, who did the morning deliveries for the village, with instructions to bring it to the lodge when Callum made his first round. Callum received it with the serious, careful expression of someone who understands he is holding something that matters. Sullivan sat at the window for a while after the boy left. The inn was quiet. The frost border stretched away in the dark under a clear winter sky, stars so thick and close they seemed to sit just above the fields. He had been in this territory for 8 days. He had arrived without sending word, with 3 prepared speeches, and had ended by sitting on a study floor in the dark, reading the testimony of his own absence. He was not the same wolf he had been 8 days ago. He was not certain what wolf he was becoming, but he understood now the difference between performing distance and actually earning it. The difference between armor and walls, and which of them a person could live behind, and which of them sealed you away from the things that made living worth doing. He sat at the window until he was tired enough to sleep. He slept better than he had in 3 years. The letter arrived at Wolfcrest Lodge at 9 o'clock in the morning. Callum knocked at the side entrance, the one that opened to the working passage, because that was where Valentina was most often found in the mornings. He handed over the letter with the solemn expression of a young wolf who has been trusted with something important and has not let it fall. Valentina took it to the library. She sat at the reading table, by the south-facing window, in the clear winter morning light. The fire was already lit. The room was warm. She had a cup of tea cooling at her elbow and the dissolution papers in the hearthstone drawer of the desk. Filed, organized, attended to, the way she attended to everything. She looked at the sealed letter for a moment. The handwriting on the outside was his. She recognized it from the early letters of their first year, the ones she had read twice each when they arrived. She had not seen his handwriting in over 2 years. It was the same. It was somehow both the same and entirely different. She broke the seal. She unfolded the pages. She read from the first line to the last, slowly, in the winter light. 5 pages. 3 hours of writing, she would later estimate. She knew the rhythm of careful thought committed to paper, having spent years producing it herself. He wrote about the fields, and the farrier, and Ember, the difficult mare. He wrote about the school, and Evangeline, and the primers he had arranged to arrive before winter. He crossed out 2 lines and left the crossings out, which she found, reading past them, was a more revealing kind of honesty than a clean page would have been. He wrote about his mother's portrait. She set that page down for a moment. She looked out the south window at the frost border in the morning light. She had found the portrait in a storage room on her 2nd month at the lodge, rolled and wrapped, in a condition that suggested it had been put away rather than lost. She had asked Donovan Wolfthorne about it, and learned only that it had been there since before her arrival. She had sent it to a restorer in the capital city, paid for from the household accounts under the entry lodge maintenance, and hung it in the east hall where the morning light would find it. She had not told Sullivan. It had not been for him. It had simply been the right thing to do for a woman who deserved better than a storage room. She picked the page up again. She read the last paragraph. "I thought my mother would have liked you. This is something I had not permitted myself to think before. Now that I have, I find I believe it completely." The fire in the library hearth burned quietly. The winter morning pressed clear and cold against the south-facing windows. Outside, the frost border stretched away in the good, patient stillness of well-managed land. The fields she had drained, the routes she had restructured, the healing center at the crossing, the school in the village with the new primers arriving before winter, the border wolves who had names and histories and families, and a she-wolf who had learned all of it by asking. She set the letter down on the reading table. She sat with it for a while, not thinking exactly, being in the specific anchored way she had learned to be during the 3 years of building something real without a partner. grounded in the actual room, the actual light, the actual warmth of an actual fire in the home she had made her own. Then, after a while, she reached for a piece of writing paper from the desk drawer. She uncapped the ink jar. She thought for a moment about what she wanted to say, not what would be correct, or careful, or measured. She had been careful and measured for 3 years, and it had served her well, and she did not regret a single measured word. But this was a different morning. He had sent her a letter. His first in 3 years of marriage and a handful of days of courtship. He had sent it from an inn at the edge of her border, because he understood, without being told that the lodge was her home. She began to write. She wrote about the morning. The specific quality of winter light through the south library windows. The way it made the old wood of the reading table look like something her grandmother might have owned. She wrote about Ember the mare, who had apparently decided to trust him, which was, she wrote, either a testament to his patience or evidence that Ember was a worse judge of character than previously understood, and she had not yet determined which. She did not cross out that line. She let it stay. She wrote that she had read every word he sent her. She wrote that she was glad the primers were coming before winter. She wrote that Evangeline Wolfhart would not thank him for it directly. That was not Evangeline's way, but that the care with which she prepared the next morning's lessons would be a kind of thanks for those who knew how to see it. She wrote about the portrait. She wrote that his mother's name, according to the restorer's records, had been Isadora Direfang, née Wolfgren, which meant she was distantly related to Seraphine by the old pack lines. She wrote that she had found this out while arranging the restoration and had not included it in any letter because there had been no letters at that point. She wrote that she was glad he had seen it in the morning light. She wrote, "I am beginning to think that the most honest thing about you is what you do when no one has asked you to do it. You went to the school on Monday morning. You held the mare's head for 40 minutes. You sat at an inn writing desk at midnight, rather than claiming a room in a house that was not yet yours to claim. I have been watching this. I want you to know that I have been watching this." She paused. She looked out the window at the frost border. Then she continued. She wrote, "I do not know yet what we are building. I am not sure the word exists yet for what two wolves are when they have dissolved one thing and are choosing carefully to begin something else in its place. But I find that I am willing to find out, on my terms, on my schedule, by my invitation, as agreed, and also, I find, with something that is beginning to feel a great deal like looking forward to it." She closed the letter with her name, not Lady Wolfcrest, not V. Wolfcrest, Frost Border Territory Delegate. Simply, Valentina. She sealed it. She asked Augustus to carry it to the inn. Then she picked up the territorial accounts and went back to work, because the Frost Border did not pause for matters of the heart, and she had never asked it to. But somewhere between the drainage figures on page 4 and the patrol rotation updates on page 7, she found herself pausing, not long, just a breath. She was smiling. Outside, the frost border spread away in the winter light. Good land, managed land, a territory built from patience and 287 letters, and the specific daily work of a she-wolf who had decided long ago that the absence of a partner was not the absence of a purpose. She had built it all. She had built it alone. She had built it the way you build anything that matters, one careful, specific, unremarkable day at a time. And now, in the library of the lodge she had made her own, with a cup of tea cooling at her elbow and an ink jar freshly uncapped, and the winter light full on the frost boar fields she had remade. From neglect, Lady Valentina Wolfcrest reached for the next page of the accounts. She was still smiling when she found it. Tomorrow she would send word.